when you look in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. I want to again take it back to Arabia, and we're going to go 1410 years before or more into this period of time in the Arabian Peninsula. And what you have to understand about the Arabian Peninsula itself is that the Arab people who were living there are actually a mixed people themselves. And so when you start to talk about racial definitions, you have a problem even in Arabia to do that. Because people were not necessarily distinguished in the Arabian Peninsula by the color of their skin. This strict color definition is something which is only recent from the 16th century. And even if you look back to Herodotus and other Greek and Roman historians, when they talked about ancient Egypt, they said the ancient Egyptians were dark-skinned people with woolly hair. They had no problem with color. They had no problem at all. It is only in the 16th century now that color has become so crucial to people's definition. And so the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was the seal of the prophets, who came in line with the other prophets, began his mission in Mecca, in the city of Mecca. And he basically taught the belief in one God. He basically confirmed the teachings of those who came before him, that you should be honest, you should not steal, you should not lie, you should not commit adultery, you should not oppress, you should believe in one God, you should pray, you should give in charity, you should fast. He confirmed what the other prophets taught before his time. And it is recorded in the history books, and you can go to a book, Ibn Ishaq. There are a number of very serious Islamic works that are written in Arabic language. Arabic was a lingua franca of Islamic civilization. And so in Arabic, Africans or people from many different parts of the world wrote. And you find that from the beginning, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was surrounded by people of all nationalities. One striking quality, though, about his followers was that they were generally from the lower class. He himself was from the tribe of Quraysh, and the Quraysh was considered to be a noble tribe. That is because they were descendants of Abraham, of the Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him. Also, they were descendants of one of the tribes from southern Arabia, Jurhum. And they were also a descendant of Hagar, or Hajar, who was an Egyptian, who was the wife, one of the wives of the Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him. And so they were considered a noble tribe, and they were in a leading position in Mecca itself. Although he came from that tribe, he wasn't a rich person. He was surrounded by people from the lower class. And so you find the slaves in Arabia at that time were not from one particular racial group. They were from any racial group, including the Arabs themselves, because it was based upon your position in society and not your racial definition. And so it is recorded that a number of his followers, and one of the famous followers, Bilal ibn Rabah, radiallahu an, may Allah be pleased with him, was the person who called to prayer for the Prophet, one of the early Muslims. Also Salman al-Farisi, a Persian man. He was also a slave. There was also Suhaib al-Romi, Suhaib the Roman, was also in a slave position. And you will find that there were Arabs, Zayd, a number of people who were Arabs who were in slave positions. And so from the beginning, Islam taught that people should not submit to created things, but they should submit to the creator of the heavens and the earth. In the opening chapter of the Quran, it says, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. This says, you alone, O God, do we worship, and you alone do we seek for help. And so this concept, which is called Tawheed, the strict concept of monotheism, gave the individual a feeling not to submit to created things, but to submit only to the creator of the heavens and the earth. And so from the beginning, one of the strong actions done by the Muslims was to free the slaves. And so you find a number of people being freed from the beginning, especially by one of the Sahaba, companions of the Prophet, whose name was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, who was recorded to have freed a number of slaves, a number of people from the lower class, And many of these people rose up in the ranks of the Muslims to become people of distinction. It is also reported that the Prophet himself freed 63 slaves. His wife Aisha freed 67. The Prophet's uncle Abbas freed 70 slaves. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of the rich Sahaba, there's a number of reports, but he freed thousands of slaves. Zukala Himyari freed 8,000 slaves. Abdullah ibn Umar freed 1,000. Hakim ibn Hazm freed 100. And this list continues. And you will find within the annals of history, if you read the history book of At-Tabari, Tariq At-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, Ibn al-Athir, you go into the actual reports from the language of the people living at the time, you will find a number of people who were released from slavery by the Muslims who were struggling very seriously in those times to try to right the wrongs and to bring the society into a society of justice. Also, we find that the Prophet, peace be upon him, made it very clear in his language to his followers what their relationship should be. And in one hadith, which was reported on the authority of Abu Huraira, who was one of the famous companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said that the Prophet, peace be upon him, reported a saying from the Creator himself. And this is called Hadith Qudsi for the Muslims who are here. It's not the Quran, it's not a saying of the Prophet, but it is when the Prophet quotes from the Creator. And this is what it says. Allah the Almighty said, "There are three whose enemy or adversary I shall be on the day of judgment, or the day of resurrection. A man who has given his word by me and has broken it. A man who has sold a free person and has consumed the price. And a man who has hired a workman has exacted his due in full from him and has not given him his wages." This is reported in a text which is called Bukhari, which is a very authentic, which is the second most authentic source for the Muslims. And so Islam struggled then to liberate the people from physical bondage, from psychological bondage, and from spiritual bondage. You also found that Islam allowed slaves to buy their freedom. Now, what was happening is, again, you're coming into a society where slavery is an institution spread throughout the world. And so within the society itself, this is a class of people. There is free and there is slave. This is the way it is. And so the Quran itself in chapter 24, verse 33 says, and if those who are in your possession ask for a deed of emancipation, execute the deed of emancipation with them, provided that you find some good in them, and give them something out of the means Allah has given to you. Also, one of the pillars of Islam, which is called zakat, and this is the third great pillar of Islam, and this is charity, or this is the due, 2.5% of the wealth, which is given every year to the poor and the needy. One of the categories of people who were defined by the Creator that you should use your wealth for is a person in slavery. That you should spend your money to get people out of a state of slavery. And so what we find is that the definition of slavery itself was narrowed down. Originally, slavery could be a person who captures another person. A person who just goes to a marketplace and buys a person. The only definition that remained within Islamic Sharia, which is the law of Islam, is for the prisoners of war. So actually the word slave itself is really the wrong definition. It's the wrong term. Because when you say slave in English, what comes into your mind is somebody who is captured and somebody who is put in ball and chains, working on a plantation. This is not the Islamic definition. The Islamic definition of right-hand possession is a person who comes into the society as a prisoner of war. And so what Islam basically was doing was phasing out this institution of the prisoners of war. It is not a needed institution. It is not one of the pillars of Islam, as the New York Times might say. But what it was an international institution. It was a relationship that people had throughout the world. And Islam was bringing the people out of the institution, phasing it out. It was not wise at that time, according to what we understand, to try to totally eliminate it. Because the relationship of slave to master was a relationship throughout the world. And so therefore what was done, it was narrowed down. Capturing a person was prohibited. Going to the marketplace and just buying somebody for any reason was prohibited. It is only when a person is a prisoner of war. In that condition, according to the traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we find that if a person fell into that condition, that they were supposed to eat the same food as the person who was above them, wear the same clothing, not supposed to be punished or harmed, and they were supposed to be helped to come out of that condition as soon as possible. This is the root definition of quote-unquote slavery within Islam. It is a narrowed down institution which was not a pillar of Islam and not a necessary institution within Islamic life. And so you find that as Islam spread to different parts of the world, in many parts of the world, slavery completely disappeared. In some parts of the world, when people, in the name of Islam, wanted to take advantage of other people, slavery then continued. And I'm not here today to stand in front of you and say that slavery did not exist in the Muslim world, and there were not people who were quote-unquote Muslims who were not involved in slave raiding or slave trading. What I am here basically to show you is that there is a difference between a person who is actually practicing Islam in the proper way, according to Sharia, the Islamic law, and a person who has an Islamic name, who comes from a Muslim family and carries out what they want to carry out anyway. There's a difference between the two. You might find a person, wal iyadhu billah, may Allah protect us from it, who is a Muslim, you might find him drinking alcohol. Muslims don't drink alcohol, but you might find somebody who drinks. That's his problem. That is not Islam that made him do that. That is the choice that the individual made to carry it out. When you look at the history of Islam in the era that is called in Islamic jurisprudence the time of the Salaf as-Salih, this is the first 3 generations of Islam. You find within that early time, there is no slave raiding that is going on. There is no historical report that shows that Muslims were involved in slave raiding or in slave trading, as it happened later on in Islamic history. That is the source for Islamic lifestyle. And so people have practiced Islam based upon their understanding of their relationship with the Creator and their ability to perform the Sharia.